Palace of the Governors is living and breathing because it changed as the people who lived within it changed. It anchors 400 years of American history in a way that no other place in the United States does. The Palace of the Governors is a really important place in American history because it's the only public building that's been occupied and occupied the same space for 400 years. And that 400 years spanned the time of the Spanish colonization of the Southwest in New Mexico, or the retaking of New Mexico during the Pueblo Revolt, the return of the Spanish in the 18th century, the Mexican independence from the Spanish in the 1820s, and then the coming of the Americans in 1846. The palace itself as a building holds evidence of all four of those important periods in its walls and in its foundations, but also in the space it occupies beneath the ground. Here beneath the floors of the palace in 1974 and 1975, archaeologists found foundations, adobe floors, and adobe walls remaining from the first Palace of the Governors from the early 17th century. On top of those floors, we have the foundations and walls and floors from the Pueblo Revolt, Pueblo. In 1680, Pueblo people and their allies basically expelled the Spanish, and from Santa Fe and the missions, there was a four-story pueblo made up of 1,000 rooms with two plazas that occupied this space. The room remnants that we have beneath the floors of the palace are the only physical evidence of that time. To me, this is almost hallowed space. The space behind the Palace of the Governors was one of the last archaeological frontiers in downtown Santa Fe. Before the construction of the new History Museum, we had an opportunity to complete a fairly detailed archaeological excavation. Working within what we thought were the most important deposits and areas, we recovered 800,000 artifacts. We went from finding the earliest ground surface, the ground surface that Don Pedro de Peralta would have walked on. We found over 200 features, which are man-made pits, irrigation channels. We exposed the remains of almost 10,000 square feet of Spanish buildings that were used for barracks and storerooms. And what was really interesting is that you started to feel just how Spartan and difficult the living conditions were for the soldiers who lived behind the Palace of the Governors in the 18th century. They had these hard floors, hard cold adobe walls, and these small corner fireplaces, that they heated themselves with in the cold winter evenings. The soldiers' barracks extended from west to east for at least a couple hundred feet right through this area where we're standing now. We found foundations which were made out of river cobbles. We found 3 layers of cobbles, one from the 1860s, one from the 18th century, and one from the 17th century. Some of these cobbles weigh over 150 pounds. To me, what's interesting about all the cobbles is that we were able to start to get at the level of effort that goes into building a major governmental complex in terms of the materials, the time, and the manpower. And we found the cobble foundations from the 18th century building like right here. So as people walk across this spot, they're crossing history into the New Mexico History Museum. Occasionally we would just find this tiny artifact that would bring us back to the people who lived at the palace. We recovered 2 amulets. These amulets, which are called egas, they are meant to bring good luck or ward off the evil eye in the 17th century Spanish culture. In this case, the very small amulet that we found, we believe, was probably attached to a baby's blanket. And then also what's really interesting in terms of the 19th century is you see the innovations that come with the industrial age in small ways through the archaeology. So it's not just about the Palace of the Governors as an architectural place, it's also the Palace of the Governors as this place that encapsulates changes that occurred throughout American history. The Palace of the Governors, it's the biggest European colonial site in the Southwest. In terms of size, it's not the biggest, but in terms of the breadth of time that it incorporates,